Paracelsus was a physician and alchemist. He believed the world was composed of 4 elements. He didn't come up with this idea, instead attempted to expand upon it in a way that would rationalize the existence of nearly all supposed supernatural beings. In this way, Paracelsus proposed that there existed a wide range of spirits that abided by the classical elements, and these creatures and beings were not devils or monsters. They were creations from God no different than plants, animals, and people, and these creations should be understood and appreciated like the others. According to him, the 4 basic elemental spirits were gnomes, undynes, silphs, and salamanders. Good evening, travelers. My name is Anunnaki, and in this episode of Crypto Crossing, we're taking a look at the 4 elemental spirits to see which element reigns supreme. For the uninitiated, Crypto Crossing is the show where we look at who these monsters are, what they can do, and finally discuss why one of them beats the others. Who are the elementals? Before our world was completely dominated by mankind, the forces of nature reigned above all else. Before one animal rose up to conquer all others, every creature had its place, every blade of grass and every grain of sand. Every inhabitant of the natural world was governed by invisible forces that controlled the blowing of wind, the falling of rain, or the growing of trees. According to Paracelsus, these forces were the work of the elementals. In some of his works, such as De Meteoris, Paracelsus also referred to the elementals collectively as Sagani, which I will make an effort to do in this episode.
Invisible, spiritual counterparts of visible nature, many resembling human beings in shape and inhabiting worlds of their own, unknown to man because his undeveloped senses were incapable of functioning beyond the limitations of the grosser elements.
Paracelsus wasn't alone in his beliefs. In fact, he was said to be a prominent member of the Rosicrucian faith who would later adopt many of his ideas. Using special alchemical medicines, the Rosicrucians would see the otherwise invisible spirits. Here, all elementals were naturally immortal but lacked a soul, meaning when they died, they would cease to exist entirely. However, marriage between a human and elemental would switch them, granting the humans immortality in exchange for giving the elemental their ticket to the afterlife. It was for this reason many Rosicrucians gave a vow of chastity in hopes of one day meeting and marrying an elemental themselves.
The subdivisions and elaborations by Paracelsus, the Rosicrucians, and the modern Theosophists are no doubt amplifications of that popular belief in the existence of a race, neither divine nor human, but very like to human beings, who existed on a plane different from that of humans, though occupying the same space, which resembles the theory of these mystics in its main outlines, and was probably what suggested it to them.
The view of elementals is very similar to the belief in fairies as a separate race of invisible people who control the elements. Many sources use the term fairy and elemental interchangeably, and this can even be seen in a previous Crypto Crossing where I allowed the Fae to use basic elemental abilities. Today, the elementals are still a part of several esoteric practices and faiths, such as Wicca, although they are rather uncommon compared to other spirits. Neither angels nor demons, the elementals don't tend to align themselves with the forces of good and evil, and thus aren't beholden to any grand authority. However, the powers of much stronger deities and gods, local or otherwise, can still be used to threaten or control them. Okay, so enough about who the elementals are in a general sense. Who are they more specifically?
It's a sedan. We're by highway marker 12. And Frank? Frank? Frankie!
Who are the gnomes? Perhaps the most well-known of the bunch, gnomes are small humanoids who serve as guardian spirits of the forest, likely getting its name from the Latin gnomos, meaning earth dweller.
The earth is filled almost to the center with gnomes or fairies, people of small stature, the guardians of treasures or mines and of precious stones. They are ingenious, friends of men, and easy to be commanded. They furnish the children of the philosophers with as much money as they need, and never ask for any other reward for their services, other than the glory of being commanded.
The idea of mystical little people is an ancient and universal one. According to Paracelsus, they were all essentially different branches of the same group, perhaps the earliest being dwarves from Norse mythology, which are said to have been created when the body of the giant Ymir was transformed into the earth. As his flesh became stone, the maggots feasting on said flesh became little men who figuratively feasted on the earth itself. Dwarves, pygmies, elves, fairies, leprechauns, even small trolls called hulderfolk were all said to be small elemental spirits of the earth. Such beings lived within rock and stone and perceived it as simply as we might with air or water, not only moving freely within it, but also seeing the sun and moon and stars shining deep through the earth like it were made out of glass. Peaceful and benevolent in nature, gnomes were believed to serve as guardian spirits of nature and the wilderness, tending to trees and wildlife and serving to maintain the natural order of the forest. For this reason, gnomes became closely associated with gardening, later gaining global iconography as lawn ornaments for this very reason. Who are the undynes? Often compared to mermaids, undynes are the elemental spirits corresponding to water, appearing as beautiful women, fish, or something in between. Where the other elementals are somewhat free-roaming, every undyne is geographically stationed at some sort of natural water feature. Lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. All natural water features are said to be home to their very own undyne, which is responsible for said water and its flow. Undynes are a broad group that includes many different water spirits in many different cultures. The Greeks, for example, believed many freshwater spirits descended from the ocean spirits called Nereids, which themselves were the daughters of the Old Man of the Sea, which is basically any ocean god your mythology believes in. The British Isles have their own myths concerning spirits of the waters, often labeled as fairies. Some famous examples include the Banshee, a cloaked old woman seen washing clothes by a river and whose wailing spells oncoming death, or the Kelpie, a beautiful woman who may disguise herself as a horse in order to lure people into riding her before taking them into the water and drowning them. Undynes were often respected due to their divine heritage and sometimes given sacrifices. Valuable items were often tossed into bodies of water, and the undyne may in turn bestow a blessing or even repair the item or enhance it in some way. A famous example of this appears in the legends of King Arthur, where the Lady of the Lake grants him the sword Excalibur. The undyne may also be asked to tell one's fortune or future, as many possess incredible wisdom or foresight into upcoming events. But be careful, crossing an undyne can lead to them cursing you with sickness or blindness or worse. Whatever their form, there is a recurring motif of a lure in temptation, which is followed by tragedy or death soon after, closely matching the beauty and dangers of water itself. Who are the silphs? Blending the Latin sylvestris and nympha, literally making them forest nymphs. They are elements corresponding to the air and are responsible for the blowing of wind and the formation of clouds. In the words of Paracelsus himself, they are rougher, coarser, taller, and stronger. Silphs would later be elaborated on as hairy giants. Under the view of Paracelsus, all manner of giants from myth and folklore, as well as hairy humanoids like Bigfoot, were considered examples of silphs. While a lot of you might find it far-fetched to imagine all breeds of Sasquatch to actually be wind elementals, one example from Scotland makes a convincing case. The Fearliath, aka the Big Grey Man, is a monstrously large figure said to haunt the summit and passes of Ben Macdui. The being is said to be incredibly territorial and spawns a thick blanket of cloud to conceal its presence before frightening hikers. One mountaineer, Alexander Tunian, recounted,
"The atmosphere became dark and oppressive. A fierce, bitter wind whisked among the boulders, and an odd sound echoed through the mist. A loud footstep, it seemed. Then another and another. Strange shape loomed up. I see it came charging at me. Without hesitation, I whipped out the revolver and fired 3 times at the figure. When it still came on, I turned and hurried down the path, reaching Glenderry in a time that I've never bettered."
This brutish nature seems most prominent for male silphs, as female silphs appear quite differently as sleek, majestic, and fairy-like. Most commonly, silphs take on the form of air itself, becoming not only invisible but gaining flight and incredible speed. For this association, the name sylph has become synonymous with invisible spirits. Who are the salamanders? In real life, salamanders are a class of small amphibians. However, this animal is said to have simply borrowed its name from a much older and much more fantastical creature. Paracelsus alternatively referred to these creatures as Vulcanus, but I'll continue to use the name salamander for this episode. The salamander of myth was described as a monstrous reptile with the ability to breathe fire. They are thus believed to be the elemental spirits of flames and heat that are responsible for forest fires. It's commonly believed that this association was born from the real animal's tendency to live in damp, tight spaces like that of a rotting log. People would gather materials to use as firewood and inadvertently scoop up the poor creature's home, and upon setting said wood alight, the creature would quickly try to escape, giving the impression that the salamander was literally born from the fire itself. As an amphibian, the skin of the salamander is naturally damp and can even excrete a sort of mucus to shield itself from extreme heat, giving the illusion that it's fireproof. Some ancient writers viewed this fireproof nature as a symbol of Jesus Christ, baptizing with the fire of the Holy Spirit. However, more writers believe the creature to be of supernatural, possibly even demonic origin. Before being categorized as an elemental, the salamander had a reputation for being incredibly poisonous and venomous, able to kill cattle with just one whiff of its breath. Under the view of Paracelsus, the elemental family of salamanders also includes beasts such as dragons and basilisks, who similarly demonstrate flaming breath, deadly poison, and various reptile-like traits. While this little critter is born from fire, they don't stay little for long. Consuming the heat and flames directly allows the salamander to quickly grow in size, spreading more flames and thus quickly getting out of hand if not dealt with quickly. It's said that in the right conditions, a single salamander could burn a whole city or forest to the ground just to feast on the heat. And once the embers burn through all the fuel, the creature lays its microscopic eggs in the ashes before fizzling out and dying, allowing the cycle to repeat in the future when one of those eggs eventually finds its way into someone's fireplace. Alright, now that we've gotten to know who our combatants are, let's take a look at what they are and what they can do. While each of the Sagani have wildly different traits that separate them, each is able to transition between states, either to literally become one with their element or to accommodate their interaction with said elements. Standing at less than 1 meter in height, gnomes are essentially a sexless species that reproduces by carving additional members out of raw stone. Gnomes are said to move through rock and stone as easily as we move through air. Some view this as meaning they are like phantoms, intangible to solid matter. However, their interaction with other elements leads me to believe they're quite solid. Therefore, I must consider the gnomes as not merely floating through the earth, but instead digging. Burrowing with so much ease that it's as if they're swimming or even flying. This would vary by exact minerals, but generally, crushing rock by force alone should require 100 megapascals, or just above 14,500 psi. As the average human punch is around 150 psi, this suggests the brute strength of a gnome would be around 100 times greater than a human being. Nicholas Pierre Henry also suggested that gnomes inhabit the Earth almost all the way to the core. The Earth's core is roughly 5,200 degrees Celsius, meaning they'd possess an immunity to extreme heat to the point of stone being rendered as magma. They would also be withstanding the crushing pressure of the entire Earth, over 300 gigapascals, or over 43 million psi, pressing down on them. Truly as fluid in shape as water itself is, the undyne appears in a multitude of different forms, from a beautiful woman, to a mermaid, to a fish, to even a horse. Like all elementals, undynes lack a true soul until they are married, so very often they assume the shape of a beautiful young woman to seduce men into marrying them. What's more, the undyne in this human guise can actually produce fertile offspring with their partners, creating humans with both an immortal soul as well as something called a watermark, a unique physical characteristic relating to aquatic life. Sometimes this can be something useful, like fins to enhance swimming or gills to breathe underwater, but it can also be something quite negative, such as an inability to live comfortably on land. The undyne, however, never faces such difficulties, instead gaining the full abilities of their form without the drawbacks. It's been said that the undyne has complete mobility through water, as free and quick as the water itself. The average speed for stationary rivers is only about 3 miles per hour. However, an uncontrolled stream like those seen during floods can reach in excess of 15 miles per hour. This might not sound like a lot, but consider the current world record for swimming, held by Michael Phelps, is only 6 miles per hour, so the undyne's mobility moving through water is 2.5 times faster than that. And while kelpies aren't known to go far from the water's edge, if we assume they have the standard running capabilities of a horse, then their land speed would average 25 to 30 miles per hour for a standard gallop. And I guess this counts as a feat of biology, so I'm including it here. In Greek myth, we see the water nymph Salamansis, who fell in love with a boy named Hermaphroditus. He rejected her advances, but she was unwilling to part with him, so she fused herself with him to create a being that was both genders, which is where we get the term hermaphrodite. So, yeah, in addition to shape-shifting, undynes can permanently fuse themselves with others. Water isn't the only fluid. The sylph too demonstrates the freedom of air and can change in shape and size. Often, the sylph simply swaps between their default form of a solid-bodied creature and the form made entirely of wind, rendering them invisible and virtually immune to all physical attacks. As a solid being, the sylph is a humanoid of incredible size, compared to both the Sasquatch as well as giants of myth. If Sasquatch and similar creatures are accepted to be members of the sylph family, then their proportional strength would be incredible. Even their smallest members, only a few meters in height, would have a level of strength far exceeding a human's, anywhere from 20 to even 100 times greater, approaching their larger sizes. Interestingly, the sylph appears to demonstrate a degree of sexual dimorphism in which different sexes display varying features. While the males are hairy and brutish, the females are thought of as being much more elegant, almost fairy-like in appearance. Whether solid or air, the sylph has the highest mobility potential, moving with the speeds of strong winds exceeding 100 miles per hour, not to mention the fact that they possess flight, soaring among the clouds or kicking up leaves without a care in the world. Conventional reports of the salamander describe a creature, well, identical to the animal. An amphibian roughly a few inches from head to tail. However, this fits with the narrative of how the creature simply starts small and becomes larger as they consume more flames and heat, until reaching giant proportions. Salamanders have an incredibly interesting physiology when it comes to their chemical makeup. They would need to possess not only a way of generating flames, but also directly turning that heat back into stored energy. In a way, this is analogous to how flies vomit up acid to digest their food externally before consuming it again, albeit much more extreme. All the while, they're immune to the damage of fire itself. Real salamanders achieve this by excreting a flame-retardant mucus from their skin, but the mythical beast is instead said to carry this property in its blood, which could be harvested to create fire-resistant ointments. However, no biological process is perfect. The creation of waste is often necessary. Thankfully for the salamander, this waste results in its breath and sweat being an incredibly toxic compound that can kill just about anything that comes into contact. I'd like to take a moment to briefly explain the difference between poison and venom, since a lot of people often confuse the two. Basically, poison is something which is toxic after you eat or touch it. It's a defensive measure to stop predators from attacking or eating it. Meanwhile, a venom is an offensive chemical used for killing or disabling prey. These toxins are usually only dangerous in certain ways. For example, you could drink scorpion venom and be fine as long as it never enters your blood. For the purposes of this discussion, the salamander's toxins are a kind of poison, used to defend itself from physical harm, while it uses fire for offense. As with all waste, it needs to be expelled. If forced to withstand its own chemicals, the salamander would die like the others. Paracelsus believed that the salamander had many biological relatives which exhibit a number of similar traits. Conventional dragons, for example, were said to breathe fire and achieve great sizes like the salamander was said to after feasting. Meanwhile, the venomous basilisk was rather small in size, but incredibly toxic. Several real animals would have also fallen into this category, such as a multitude of venomous snakes, some of which can spit their venom at foes, or the Komodo dragon, which features a deadly mouth bacteria that it uses as a venom. While of course individual members will vary in intelligence, each of the four elementals has a general ordering in terms of advancement. Starting at the bottom of this spectrum is the salamander. While Paracelsus describes each of the races as their own people, the salamander appears to be little more than a wild animal, mirroring its real-life counterpart, not even displaying any complex behaviors or social marks that are present in some animals. No language, no tools, no tactics, nothing more than basic animal instinct. One step above is the sylph. About as advanced as a Neanderthal, this wild man displays a range of sounds and calls, basic social structures, and even territorial behavior. Again citing sexual dimorphism, the males seem to be the more primitive side, while the females display greater intelligence, at least enough to be compared to an average human. In the very least, sylphs demonstrate an incredible animal instinct that makes them very attuned with the natural world. Moving on to gnomes, and we see some real progress, as gnomes display all the trappings of basic society. Tools, clothing, houses and furniture. Gnomes are highly creative and inventive and capable of constructing things to suit their needs. They form complex social groups with government and jobs. They even have a vast knowledge of the world of medicine and biology, allowing them to serve as doctors for not only themselves, but also other critters of the forest. Finally, at the top of this hierarchy is the undyne. With an almost oracular role, undynes not only possess incredible wisdom and understanding, but also often a direct knowledge of future events. They may not use this intelligence for things like inventions or advanced societies, instead isolating themselves and living in peace, free of earthly desires and possessions. An ability as natural to the sylph as breathing, control over the element of air allows for control over wind, rain, and cloud formations. Very skilled sylphs may use this to great effect by creating powerful thunderstorms or even cyclones, but most often it's used defensively for making fog or mist to hide in. Though they are more scientifically minded than they are spiritual, gnomes still possess a small degree of magic, able to change the chemical composition and arrangement of stone in a manner comparable to alchemy, turning one mineral into another. In this way, they are able to greatly alter the properties of the ground around them to be more or less fertile, shift solid stone into gravel or sand or clay, and even quickly forge metal tools from raw earth. Most offensively, this allows gnomes to cause earthquakes or landslides if they are able to alter the environment enough. Otherwise, they typically use this ability to cultivate the landscape to house more plants and animals, owing back to their roots as gardeners and nature spirits. Salamanders possess an inherent control over temperature, typically used for creating flames and absorbing the heat as it spreads, allowing them to easily grow stronger over time. In addition to flames, they are also highly venomous and poisonous. Physical contact with a salamander can spell death due to their toxicity, and this applies to pollution they may leave as smoke in the air, sludge in water, or residue left on the surface of rocks. This, however, does serve as their own weakness, as they are apparently not immune to their own toxins, only resistant, meaning that a salamander forced to endure its own venom for long enough will succumb and die. Last but not least is the undynes and their control over water. In fact, they were originally believed to be responsible for the springing and flow of all rivers. Before it was understood how the water cycle worked, it was believed that all rivers and streams were created using magic water jugs which could supply limitless streams of water. There are said to be roughly 150 undynes controlling the major rivers throughout Europe. The average river runoff for Europe is around 2,900 kilometers cubed per year. That comes out to about 5,500,000 cubic meters of water per minute, almost 92,000 cubic meters per second. Because water weighs 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter, that comes out to almost 92,000 metric tons of water. This measurement is of course looking at the runoff of all rivers in Europe. So if we divide that by the rough 150 undynes said to control the rivers, we get an average water output for a single undyne as roughly 600 metric tons of water every second. By the way, that's at least 200,000 times more water per second than the output of the average fire hose. Which should totally make sense. Like, have you ever seen a river in real life? I mean like a big river. Like the kind that carves its way through the earth. The kind that needs really, really strong dams to hold it back. The kind that could rip apart a whole town if that dam failed to hold that water back. Rivers are strong. Anyway, in addition to controlling water, undynes have also demonstrated the ability to place curses on individuals who cross them, chiefly blindness or other physical ailments. Contrasting curses are blessings and enchantments, making weapons more powerful or granting luck or good health to others. It's never been shown if they can apply this to themselves, but it's something to consider. And I wasn't sure if this is a curse or a blessing, but their beautiful singing can hypnotize weak-minded people. So there's that. Slipping through the trees and strangling the breeze. The sylph has the best mobility and speed, but is easily the weakest in terms of combat ability. For as fast and rough as wind and storms can be, air alone would generally be unable to harm the other Sagani, which forces the sylph to rely on physical combat, in which it is the most vulnerable as each of the other elementals demonstrates higher destructive capabilities. The sylph can theoretically create the conditions for lightning to occur, but has never demonstrated any direct control of lightning offensively. Natural lightning would likely start a fire, and the rain of the storm would simply raise water levels, helping the other elementals. Wind may be immune to physical strikes, but the salamander's fire consumes oxygen and leaves toxic smoke in its wake. The naturally venomous touch and proximity of the salamander actually serves as the most ironclad defense, as it forces the other elementals to attack it from afar in order to avoid certain doom. However, this serves as their own weakness as they're not immune to their own toxins. Poisonous fumes and polluted water can be directed back at them, and enclosed spaces hasten this process. Moreover, it may draw strength from fire to increase in size and power, but fire isn't nearly as naturally occurring as the other elements. It needs to be created, relies on finite fuel, and can be snuffed out by any of the other elements. The salamander itself has no notable feats of physical strength or defense, and thus should be highly weak to physical attacks that hit it. And of course, its own blood grants fire immunity to those who manage to spill said blood, allowing clever combatants to gain the upper hand. The intelligence and resourcefulness of the gnome would especially come in handy here. Gnomes may create walls or structures around the salamander to suffocate it, or otherwise trap it in a hole or fissures underground. Their incredible medical expertise should give them ease in using spilled blood to gain fire immunity, potentially create some sort of antidote to counteract the venom, or at least exercise caution against getting poisoned. At the very least, they could use rocks as projectiles to attack at a range, or even use actual weapons if given enough time and resources. We need to discuss how durability works because this is important. Different materials have different qualities that excel in different conditions, like resistance to pressure or sudden impacts, flexibility, or tensile strength. Diamonds, for example, are famously the hardest material in the world, but are still brittle and can be broken by things physically weaker. Otherwise, diamond cutting would be virtually impossible. With all that said, stone and similar materials have an incredible resistance to continuous pressure. This is why toilets are made of porcelain, among other reasons. However, stone is also brittle, inflexible, and susceptible to erosion. Gnomes have the highest physical defense when it comes to continuous pressure, as well as a very high offense, allowing them to easily tank nearly any physical attack and crush any enemy they get their hands on. However, while stone may not be easily burned or knocked around by wind, the destructive powers of water show to be the Earth's greatest weakness. Gnomes themselves may be able to breathe air and rock, but they cannot breathe underwater. In fact, they can't swim at all. They sink like stones. The domain of water acts as the greatest defense of all the Sagani. Fire is extinguished, air floats to the surface, rocks sink to the bottom, and all physical attacks are slowed to a crawl. Even projectiles as fast as bullets lose all lethality after entering a couple feet of water. The Undynes' physical defense may be fairly close to a human's, but it wouldn't matter. Underwater, they'd be untouchable and still be able to launch streams of water out and even reshape the battlefield. Stone can resist fire and air, but water will erode. Water carves its way through the earth. Air and earth may be very plentiful, and fire can spread, but the water here is literally infinite thanks to the Undynes' magic water jugs, on top of already being plentiful. The Undynes' control over their element is unmatched and can trump the others in raw physicality. The Undyne has the highest intelligence, sometimes directly knowing the future itself. Undynes are revered and worshipped as patron deities as they cause curses and disasters when angered. They demonstrate a profound magical affinity to affect others, which can likely bypass the elemental defenses, and even possess hypnosis to make the other Sagani fight amongst themselves. Undynes have the brains, the defense, and the offense. So between the four elementals, in order from weakest to strongest, we have the sylph, the salamander, the gnome, and finally the Undyne as the winner. I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. You can show your support by giving the video a like or sharing it with a friend. And if you really want to help out, you can become one of my supporters on Patreon and gain access to a few fun perks. Anything you could do would greatly help out and make it easier for me to make more of these in the future. It's been one hell of a ride making these, and I have many, many more I plan to do. Until next time, this is Ben Zenanaki, signing off.